Are Iran and Israel heading towards an explosion? We will soon bring you the Iranian condition that could erase Trump's agreement. The memorandum of understanding between the United States and Iran is causing a storm. In Israel, there are concerns, and in Tehran, the Revolutionary Guards are celebrating. Iran announces that the Strait of Hormuz will not return to its previous situation, and the Revolutionary Guards in Iran will collect fees from ships after 60 days. At the same time, Iran is intentionally leaking the full text of the Memorandum of Understanding that ended the conflict with the United States. And today, we will also bring you the full story behind the hundreds of billions that the Gulf states may transfer to Iran. And is the United States handing Iran the keys to Lebanon? German ships are on their way to the Red Sea. Germany is joining a new military move in our neighborhood. So did the economic chaos defeat the strongest military in the world? Did Trump promise surrender? And is Iran laughing all the way to the bank? I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Shoshani. We are here on Boots on the Ground. We bring you the full truth about what's happening in Israel and also the full truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. Today is June 18th. Let's begin. Yesterday, alongside the president of Egypt, and just before the press conference he held on the afternoon, the president of the United States called the agreement excellent and said, is it final? No, it's a memorandum of understanding. If the Iranians do not behave properly, we will immediately go back to dropping bombs straight on their heads. Look, on the other hand, less than 15 weeks ago, at the height of his enthusiasm over the way that the war with the Islamic Republic would end, United States President Donald Trump declared that there will be no agreement with Iran except unconditional surrender. But when the text of the agreement meant to end the conflict was finally published, it was very far from a surrender document. Certainly, according to the version that was leaked by the Iranians and the Memorandum of Understanding between the United States and Iran is built this way. So the war will stop on all fronts, including Lebanon. Both sides will commit to respecting sovereignty and not acting against one another. Within 60 days, they will try to reach a final agreement with the possibility of an extension. In the immediate stage, the United States will remove the naval blockade, and Iran will renew the movement of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Later, if a final agreement is signed, the United States will withdraw forces from the region, act to remove sanctions, refrain from enforcement against the Iranian oil exports, and release Iranian frozen assets. At the same time, the United States and regional partners will establish a reconstruction fund for Iran that's worth $300 billion. On the nuclear issue, Iran will repeat its commitment not to produce a nuclear weapon, but the fate of the enriched uranium will be postponed to the final agreement. Until then, the status quo will be preserved. Iran will not change the state of its nuclear program, and the United States will not impose new sanctions. If a final agreement is signed, a supervision mechanism will be established to implement the understandings, and it will receive force through a binding resolution of the United Nations Security Council. So in simple words, first a ceasefire and relief for Iran, and then only after an attempt to close the truly big question, the nuclear issue, the sanctions, Lebanon, and freedom of action in this region. The principles and the document with Iran, they may temporarily move things around here, but it gives Tehran an economic and a diplomatic lifeline. It strengthens its positions in Lebanon and also leaves in its hands the nuclear and the missile capabilities that will require Israel to prepare in a new way. I want to emphasize for just a moment several clauses in the draft understandings between the United States and Iran. One of them is the nuclear clause. Iran is supposed to dilute its enriched uranium and return it to the level that is suitable for civilian use under the IAEA supervision. What does that mean in practice? The main concern today is uranium. Uranium that is enriched to a very high level, which is around 60%. That is still not a bomb, but it's already a major leap beyond what is required for just a normal power plant, even a nuclear power plant. And it brings Iran very close to the dangerous zone of 90%, a level considered suitable for a nuclear bomb. Uranium dilution, or downblending, is a process in which the enriched material is taken and then mixed with natural or diluted uranium until the concentration of the fissile materials drop to a much lower level, about 3 to 4%. At that level, it can be used for civilian energy, but not directly for a bomb. The IAEA is supposed to supervise this process through cameras, seals, material samples, and inspections on the ground. The goal is to make sure that the material was truly diluted and was not disappeared, was not hidden or transferred somewhere else. But here is the important point. Dilution is not destruction. The uranium remains in Iran. The knowledge remains in Iran. The centrifuges, if they are not truly dismantled or limited, can become a problem again the moment that the agreement shakes. That's why, from Washington's point of view, this is a step that pushes Iran away from a bomb in the immediate term. From Jerusalem's point of view, this is only a delay of the threat, not a full solution, because Iran is not giving up its nuclear program. It is only agreeing for now to lower the flame, gain time, and enter another 60 days of negotiations. And another sensitive point in this agreement, that's Lebanon. Because in the agreement between the United States and Iran, Lebanon is a big part, and it's a big part for Israel and what's happening here. So what we are seeing here is very dangerous for the future of the Jewish state, because this is a major concern here in Israel, in Jerusalem. The concern is that Hezbollah is not being dismantled. It's actually receiving a new diplomatic umbrella. Iran is receiving time, it's receiving money, it's receiving relief, and Israel may receive less freedom of action against a threat that still stands on the border. The spokesman for the Iranian Foreign Ministry made it absolutely clear that the agreement will be cancelled if Israel does not withdraw from Lebanon. He also added a threat to the Gulf states and a warning to the United States. Look, it's known that Netanyahu tried to block the emerging agreement with Iran and warned Trump that they must not be trusted. In conversations between the two, the prime minister asked, "How will you make sure that they are keeping this agreement?" While the president of the United States pushed with all his strength to advance the diplomatic move with Tehran. And now everyone is talking about Trump-Netanyahu relations. So it is important to understand the relationship has not been broken, but it has entered a very uncomfortable moment. Trump wants to present a major deal, the end of a war, open shipping lanes, and Iran committing not to reach a nuclear weapon. Netanyahu looks at the same picture and sees what is missing in it. What about Hezbollah? What about the enriched uranium? What about Israel's freedom of action the day after? This is not necessarily a drama of Trump against Israel. It is a collision between a president who wants to close a war and a prime minister who knows that Iran may be signing a paper, but it's not putting its threat on the table. A few hours ago, U.S. State Vice President J.D. Vance said that the framework agreement signed between the United States and Iran does not state that the IDF forces must withdraw from Lebanon. First of all, the agreement does not talk about whether Israel leaves southern Lebanon or not. Vance said in an interview with the Christian broadcasting network CBN, but he said, "But I really think that Israel would be happy to leave southern Lebanon as long as the Hezbollah threat disappears." The hope now in Jerusalem is that the agreement towards which the United States President Donald Trump is racing with Iran will not be implemented. Right now, There are 60 days of negotiations, which, according to the working assumption in Jerusalem, will not lead to a final agreement. The second working assumption in Israel is that it must preserve a hold in Lebanon at least until November. Why November? Because then, after the midterm elections in the United States, a new window of opportunity opens in which Israel will be able to act again on the Iranian issue. So is Trump painting before our astonished eyes a new Middle East, one in which Iran is a regional power in every sense. And alongside it, no less important, a complex state, which is Qatar. Or maybe all of this is only buying time and preparing for an unconditional response against the Revolutionary Guard. We don't know, but write us in the comments what you think will happen. One thing is certain. While everyone was looking at Iran, at Israel, Turkey simply cashed in. Turkey was pushed to the sidelines at the beginning of this war. But it managed to turn the crisis into an opportunity to secure the border, to strengthen its status in NATO, to advance weapons deals, and return to the mediation table. So, there's a lot ahead of us. Let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Mati Shoshani. We are here on Boots on the Ground. We bring you the full truth about what's happening in Israel and about the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. A second before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible and let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and look us up on our social media accounts. So, our senior Middle East correspondent, Mati Shoshani, is here with us. And I have a question, Mati. Did Iran not really emerge from the war strong, but instead emerge with something more dangerous, which is proof that it is possible to extort the world through Hormuz and receive a diplomatic prize for it?
Yes, the picture is quite complicated right now. And when we look at all the moving pieces, what Iran got, what Iran lost, the fact that it seems that on many of the clauses that appear in this agreement or the framework of the memorandum that we've been given or made public at this point, it seems that Iran has been able to get a lot, give little in return, relatively speaking, and have also figured out that they can pressure the world also in the future. Now, the picture, the story here is far more complex than that. It needs to be looked at from different layers, from different perspectives. If you start with the military layer, was the US and Israel, were they able to substantially weaken Iran? Absolutely. Were we able to eliminate much of their leadership and cut away much of their military ability and power? Also absolutely. On the side of the financial pressure, was the United States and Israel able to put enough pressure on Iran to the point where it was hurting the regime? Also absolutely to that. But when you look into the future of the conversation and what the US is allegedly or possibly committing to as far as financial easing, release of cash or frozen assets of the Iranians, when it comes to financial aid packages and rebuilding Iran, etc., the picture gets a little more complicated and less positive from the US perspective. It seems that Iran has been able to some degree to really figure out what cracks the resolve of other countries. And I'm not specifically saying the US because it's more than that. It's also the Gulf states enforcing an agreement. Now, I'll say this, it's much more, if we look at this from the perspective of the US, the fact that the US is able to bring some kind of an agreement with a regime such as the Iranian regime, a regime that is willing and has killed tens of thousands of its people in a matter of days, by the way, to hold their peace, to hold their control of the country, reaching an agreement with them is not simple. This is the kind of regime that is willing to literally watch the world burn, to bring down, this is both figuratively speaking and literally speaking. They're willing to destroy the oil supply of other countries and their own if it brings more damage to their enemies. They're willing to close off the Strait of Hormuz, knowing full well that it will collapse their economy if it causes damage also to their enemies. They are willing to lose every civilian, every asset, every infrastructure piece within Iran as long as they can claim that they remained in power. And that's the type of adversary that you're facing. And we've seen that attempts to allow the Iranian people or assist the Iranian people in overthrowing the government have not yet been successful, and we don't seem to see a pathway where that will happen in the near future. Sadly, this agreement is what we have right now. And I want to say this easily and even check myself on this topic. Criticizing this agreement is easy, but the alternative might be worse. If the alternative is a forever war where the Strait of Hormuz doesn't open up, the US has to tie down enormous military assets to keep the peace to a certain degree in this region, be it the Persian Gulf or in that area, let's call it, or protecting the Gulf states, that doesn't make sense either. That doesn't really change the situation from a different perspective. So one way or another, the agreement with Iran was never going to be a perfect agreement. The fact that Iran figured out, and they had known this also previously, that they can force the hand of their enemies, specifically the Gulf states, into entering an agreement with them, that's problematic. Now, I want to touch on one thing that is not necessarily inside the agreement, which is the question of what is going to be the relationship between Iran and their neighbors. And in that, I'm not entirely clear on where this is going, and I don't think anyone is right now. It seems that Trump and his administration, they promised some kind of a financial incentive program to Iran. How much of that is releasing their frozen assets, which are assumed to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars, and how much of that is actual aid that's going to come from Gulf states is not entirely clear. But if the equation that's created, and I'm saying if because it's not, we're not sure on where this is coming from right now, or whether or not this is the real number, but let's say $100 billion are coming from Gulf states. That means Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE are paying Iran reparations or have a financial incentive program after Iran launched missiles at them. And if that isn't surrender, if that is not an admission of defeat, well, I don't know what an admission of defeat would look like in this scenario. So it's complicated in that sense. I don't think the US is going to be paying any kind of compensation to Iran. That doesn't seem to be the case. But even the mention of cash being handed over to Iran is politically charged for the Americans. And I'd say more so if you add one last thought to this, which is that Iran is still talking about collecting some kind of fee from ships traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. If they get that, that is a lose for everyone who was involved in this war, aside from Iran. I hope that's not the case. I hope we're misguided in believing that that's the scenario that could possibly play out. But yes, Iran has not completely lost this war, and the US has not had a clear enough victory over Iran in the way that that would be able to happen. That said, was there a better scenario? Was there another play that would have dramatically changed the situation? I don't see one. Was it the right thing to go against the Iranian regime and slow down their nuclear program, dismantle it, remove some of their leadership? Yes, it was worthwhile. From an Israeli perspective, even from an American perspective, that was the right thing to do. And sometimes you just do the right thing, even though the final outcome is not known, not clear, not guaranteed. That is the reality of geopolitics in the Middle East. Sometimes you take a risk, you jump over the ledge without knowing what's going to happen because it's necessary, because it's a timely demand, and because it's the right thing to do. And that's it. Sometimes you go with it.
Mati, is the clause on Lebanon actually Iran's most important achievement in this agreement? Because it tries to turn every Israeli strike against Hezbollah into a violation of an American-Iranian agreement.
Let's talk about Lebanon for a second, because I feel like this is the most complicated issue in this entire agreement from an Israeli perspective, at least. From the US or the Iranian perspective, it's another item on the agenda. For Israel, this is not that at all. For Israel, Iran is a significant player inside of Lebanon, one that we must remove, and it operates there, well, through Hezbollah. Hezbollah is an imperial mercenary force hired by the Iranians. They're funded, they're paid for, they're created, they're left alive or maintained alive by Iranian cash inside of Lebanon. And for the IDF to say, look, there's a ceasefire that's taking place in Lebanon, period, deal with it, is a hugely problematic statement that I don't know how Israel can deal with. And I want to break this down for a second. I've been in Lebanon multiple times in this war, embedded with the IDF as a journalist, not in uniform. And when we've done that, we've seen several things. Hezbollah has built terrorism infrastructure throughout southern Lebanon to a scale, a scope, and a depth underground that is unheard of. They've spent, it's hard to explain, billions of dollars and decades building more and more tunnels, gathering additional weaponry, creating weapon stashes. I mean, we were talking here prior to October 7th of a fighting force pushing 100,000 regular soldiers, 100,000, with an elite commando force, the Radwan force, that was somewhere between 8 to 12,000 commando terrorists. And if you think that isn't a lot, I mean, go into like military research for a second and ask yourself how many countries in Europe have a deployable army with 90,000 soldiers who are trained, equipped, and active. And your answer is going to be surprising because it's none. None of the countries in Europe have that level of an army that is active. I'm not talking about reservists that can be deployed sometime. That is a substantial fighting force. That is a substantial amount of terrorists that Iran had inside of Lebanon. And for Israel to say, look, there's a ceasefire and Lebanon is included in it, it's absurd in my perspective. And let me explain that for a second. First of all, Iran doesn't represent the country of Lebanon. The country of Lebanon is opposed to Iran. And if you don't believe me, go ask them. Just Google the following quote, Lebanese president speaks about Iran, and find out what he says. They are absolutely opposed to them. They despise Iranian influence within Lebanon. They've stopped every diplomatic activity of the Iranians within Lebanon. They've expelled Lebanese citizens who are tied to the Iranians, Hezbollah operatives. They've been scanning diplomatic mail coming in to Lebanon from Iran, knowing full well that it's weaponry, and they've started checking everything that comes towards Hezbollah, knowing full well and trying to prevent the access of weaponry from Iran into Lebanon. Listen, Hezbollah is the scorn of the Lebanese people. They are a foreign terrorist entity that is destroying that country. They've assassinated people that are in the government. They've assassinated the previous president of Lebanon. They've threatened to do so again also now. So why is Lebanon even included in the ceasefire with Iran? Well, they're included not because Iran cares about the people of Lebanon or the well-being of the people of Lebanon or about Lebanon as a country or the future of the country. They care only about Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is anything but a legitimate internal movement within Lebanon. Hezbollah is a proxy of the Iranians. Hezbollah had IRGC officers planted in the ground in Lebanon in this last war to ensure that they would fight against Israel. You heard me right. IRGC officers were inside of Lebanon. IRGC officers, Iranian IRGC officers, were eliminated by Israel inside of Lebanon, even in this round of war with Hezbollah in Lebanon. So why is Iran doing this? They're doing this because they want to maintain their proxy. They're doing this because they want to create an equation where Israel can't protect itself in its borders, and they're trying to loop in the U.S. into an agreement where Israel now would be, I don't know what the word would be, in violation of an agreement working against U.S. interest by defending itself against Hezbollah in its northern border. Let me remind you, every time Israel trusts an international entity to protect its northern border, you know what happens? Hezbollah terrorists sit on the fence of our security border with Lebanon, threatening Israeli communities. And when I say sit on the fence, I don't mean that as like, this hyperbole. I'm talking about literally you drive up the road and you look left or right, depending on where you are on the border, and there are Hezbollah waving at you over there. That existed in 2006 before Hezbollah started the second Lebanon war. It existed now before October the 7th, where Hezbollah was embedded on the border with Israel in violation of the international armistice lines, in violation of the ceasefire agreements with Israel, sitting within Israeli territory in the DMZ, in the demilitarized zone, as a point of violating Israeli sovereignty and Israeli protection in the northern communities. So this is a problem, and I want to say this clearly, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. Israel not being able to protect itself in Lebanon is a huge problem. Israel being a country that works against U.S. agenda by operating against Hezbollah in Lebanon is too a huge problem. And I'll tell you what the big missing piece here is. If Clause 8, instead of, let me just check myself, sorry, if Clause 1 that talks about the ceasefire and Lebanon would have also said something along the lines of, and this political solution that we're working on, or geopolitical solution that we're working on, would also include rebuilding the government of Lebanon, that would be something different. That's not the case. What this clause says is we're not fighting in Lebanon Hezbollah gets to rebuild itself, and Israel shouldn't, and this it's implied, Israel shouldn't be attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon. I'm not cool with that. I don't think anyone in the Israeli government is, and I don't think it's a just, correct, or wise clause to have in this agreement, period. I'm saying that from an Israeli perspective. I'd also say from an American perspective, I think this is a wrong approach. The U.S. shouldn't be allowing Iran to set the rules of what happens in other countries. They should be forcing a conversation that says, Iran, how about you fix your own problems internally first before you talk about what's happening in the neighborhood, before you talk about the other countries you've been causing damage to. And we need to be honest here. Look at the track record of Iran in countries around the Middle East. They destroy nations. They destabilize them in a way that takes generations to repair from. Look at Yemen. The Houthis that are supported by Iran have destroyed the economy of an already weak country. They've been killing in the tens of thousands. They've caused a civil war and a humanitarian crisis that is unheard of in the history of that country. On a global scale, they've destroyed the country and handed it over to the most radical, most violent, most evil factions within that society, and then superpowered them by handing them ballistic missiles and weapons. They've done the same in Lebanon. They took a country already weakened by Islamic terrorists, first the PLO, then other factions and civil wars, etc., and then just boosted that existing conflict, and by feeding Hezbollah and weaponry and cash, further weakened that country. Why should we allow them to continue doing that? Why should we allow that Iranian foreign policy to exist, to even be present anywhere in the world? The answer is simple. We shouldn't. They're an evil. They are an evil empire. They are a biblical scale villain. They make a point of letting you know what they're planning to do, and allowing them to do that, allowing them to tie Lebanon into this equation is wrong, both morally and from a defense perspective. And I want to say this, I don't see Israel giving into that. I see Israel holding a presence inside southern Lebanon to prevent Hezbollah from being on our fences once more. I just don't see another option where Israel could be protected unless an international entity sponsored by the U.S. or governed by the U.S. would come in, or something very shocking or very surprising that includes the Lebanese army fighting against Hezbollah. Aside from that, I don't see a scenario where Israel can allow itself to withdraw from Lebanon. But again, I'm an Israeli, speaking from Israel, from our perspective. The U.S. has a broader scheme, a broader agenda. But again, if the goal was to bring good, to do good for the people of Lebanon or Syria or Iran, I'm afraid that this clause about Lebanon is not the way to go about it.
Is the rift between Trump and Netanyahu really a crisis in relations, or is this a moment in which a much deeper gap is exposed? America wants to end the war. Israel wants to prevent the next war.
Let's talk about Trump and Bibi, Prime Minister Netanyahu, for just a second. I want to say this first. The relationship there is complicated, but it's overall very, very positive. And just follow the news from recent days and you'll hear Trump speak about that himself. Trump, on the one hand, says that he called on Bibi to stop what he called were extreme measures that Israel was carrying out in Lebanon. And I'll get to that in a second because there's an agenda in presenting Israel that way, from an American perspective, from a White House perspective, as framing Israel as this extreme, violent entity that is very hard to control. There's an agenda there in presenting Israel that way that is actually possibly pro-Israel, not anti-Israel. But then the next day and the following day, Trump speaks about Netanyahu in an overwhelmingly positive way. He talks about the alliance between the U.S. and Israel. He talks about how Netanyahu is a wise leader that he respects, etc. I'm not speaking here just about the personal relationship between Netanyahu and President Trump. It's more than that. One, there's a kinship over there. There's an understanding of the joint goal, the joint agenda they have. But I'd say more than that, to an extreme degree almost, the U.S. and Israel have worked hand in hand in this war. And I want to tell you something. There's a lot that happens behind the scenes, a lot that happens in the things that are not released to the press, where Israel and the United States operate closely, tightly together with each other in a way that is understood by others. But it goes farther than that. It goes much farther than that. There is a rift right now between Israel and the United States. Israel and the U.S. have different agendas and different interests. We're not the same country. Contrary to what the anti-Semites and the anti-Zionists want you to believe, Israel doesn't control Washington or President Trump, and also the opposite doesn't exist. Israel isn't controlled by the United States. We have a huge and deep relationship, almost covenant-type relationship between Israel and the United States. President Trump has stood alongside Israel, and say what you want about the man, say what you want about his the way he expresses himself. Look at what he did together with Netanyahu. He stood up to the supervillain of our time. He stood up to the bully that is Iran, knowing full well that it was going to be difficult, expensive, complicated, and very hard to end. And he didn't blink. He stood beside Israel and fought against Iran twice in a 12-month period. Twice. He went against Iran on a military level. What presidents before him shied away from doing, not once, not twice, but multiple times, what countless countries in Europe are afraid to even talk about publicly, Trump did with Israel. He fought against Iran at no small cost to the U.S. He stood against the villain that was bullying people around in the Middle East and European countries and didn't blink. He didn't have second guesses. He didn't overthink this. He came and fought when the fight was correct. And Israel and the U.S. are allowed to have different agendas. That's okay. We're allowed to disagree on these topics. Israel doesn't necessarily care or need the agreement in the way the U.S. does. What do we care about? We need a weaker Iran. We need their proxies to be eliminated. We need their proxies to be as far as humanly possible from our borders and our fences. That means beating on Hezbollah until they are non-existent or some are hiding in the mountains in northern Lebanon. That's what Israel needs. Israel needs a guarantee or to make sure that the Iranian nuclear program never progresses, always keeps going back, never forward. We less have a need for the Strait of Hormuz to be open or closed. That doesn't affect us in the same public way that it affects U.S. foreign policy. We don't need the Gulf states to be happy in the same way the U.S. does. The U.S. has a more complicated map of interest. They've allied also with Gulf states. They've been trying to pull Saudi Arabia into the fold to stand alongside the United States. And they need to open the Strait of Hormuz and guarantee safety to those Gulf states for that to happen. So their agenda, their map of interest is more complicated, more nuanced than that of Israel. And again, that's okay because that's the reality of geopolitics. Has Trump turned against Netanyahu? No. Do they speak on a regular, sometimes daily basis? Absolutely. Is the military cooperation between Israel and the United States better than ever before? Without any doubt. Listen to what CENTCOM has been saying, U.S. Central Command. Listen to what Israeli defense has been saying in recent months. CENTCOM and Israeli military command are working like this. There is no gap. There's no daylight between the U.S. and Israel relationship, especially on a military level. And politics are politics. PR is PR. Don't expect 100% understanding or alignment on messaging and interest every day of the week. That's not to be expected in politics. And I want to tell you this. Netanyahu, probably more than most people, understands Trump's political needs to worry about the midterm elections, to worry about internal U.S. political issues. He understands Trump's needs to have a quick agreement and not be stuck in a forever war. That's fine. They're able to accommodate. They're able to understand that. Trump himself understands Netanyahu's political needs, and look at some of his statements about Netanyahu and some of the investigations open against him to understand how close he's following what Netanyahu is doing politically in Israel. There isn't a gap here. Let's be honest here. When Trump wants to show that someone is his enemy, he knows how to do it full well. He knows how to be the most, what's the word I'm looking for? The most brutal of adversaries to people, the most blunt of adversaries to people. That's not the case with Netanyahu. They have a friendship, they have an alliance that goes from the bottom of the military and defense industry all the way up to the two individuals on the top. And yes, on Lebanon, we're not on the same page. Absolutely not. When it comes to the end of the nuclear program in Iran from a military perspective, Israel is probably more concerned than the United States. We probably have a more burning need than that of the United States, but that's fine. We'll work through it. We've been strong many times before without U.S. help. And I believe the relationship between Israel and the United States, especially through the Republican Party, I can't speak to what will happen in the next elections, that will remain strong also in the months and years to come.
Thank you very much, Mati Shoshani. That definitely helped us better understand what we're dealing with. And to all of you, keep spreading the truth. Share this content with as many people as possible. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. And remember that as missiles are falling in Israel or suicide drones or whatever the terrorist organization decide to launch at us, many people are asking how they can stand with Israel in a meaningful way. The answer is simple. Help us rebuild. We invite you to take part in something real, something that is rooted in the land and in our hearts. So the Rebuild Israel campaign continues. It's bringing life back to Israel's north. So along Israel's northern border, an area that is marked by war, displacement, and loss, we are planting an apple orchard. Yes, we're planting trees in the place that Hezbollah tries to destroy. Not as a symbol of a single moment, but as part of a long-term commitment to restore what was damaged and strengthen Israel's future. At a time when Israel is under attack, planting trees is a powerful declaration. We're still here, we are rebuilding, we are growing, and we're not leaving. God promised this land to the people of Israel, and together we can help it flourish once again. This orchard is more than agriculture. It creates jobs for local families. It helps communities return and rebuild, and it sends a clear message to the people of Israel: you are not alone. When you donate, you're not just giving, you're rebuilding. Your support puts trees in the ground, restores livelihoods, and transforms land that is scarred by war into a land that grows again. This is how renewal takes root. This is how Israel rebuilds after war. Stand with Israel today. Plant hope, restore the north, and then strengthen the future. Go now to tbn.org/rebuild Israel. That's tbn.org/rebuild Israel, or call 800-804-7895. 800-804-7895. Rebuild the land, restore hope, bless the future. In southern Lebanon, an explosive device detonated near an IDF force that's operating in the area of the Litani River. Master Sergeant First Class Reservist Alexander Filin, 29 years of age, from Haifa, was killed in this incident. Additional officers and soldiers were wounded and evacuated for medical treatment. The IDF later struck terrorist infrastructure in the area with artillery fire. The initial investigation points to an enemy explosive device. In other words, while the world is talking about an agreement, about calm, and about the end of a war, on the ground in Lebanon, Israeli soldiers are still facing explosive devices, terrorist infrastructure, and a very real threat. And this is the question that opens this morning. How can anyone demand that Israel stop in Lebanon while Hezbollah is still leaving explosives, infrastructure, and terrorists in front of our border? To understand the story, we need to begin in Lebanon, not in Tehran, not in Washington, in Lebanon. Because the Lebanese clause has become within hours the most dangerous point in the memorandum of understanding between the United States and Iran. According to the Iranian interpretation, the commitment to respect Lebanon's sovereignty means one thing. Israel must withdraw from the areas that it holds in southern Lebanon and stop its strikes against Hezbollah. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Bagahi said this will also happen, and it has no room for interpretation. So from Tehran's point of view, if Israel continues to operate in Lebanon, and if the IDF does not withdraw, the memorandum of understanding will be considered violated. He added that one cannot speak about the end of a war while parts of Lebanon are still, in his words, under Israeli occupation. Look closely at the Iranian move. Hezbollah fires, plants explosives, builds infrastructure, and tries to return to the contact lines. Israel operates to prevent a threat to the communities of northern Israel. Then Iran comes to the table with a United States and says every Israeli action against Hezbollah endangers the entire agreement. In simple words, Tehran is trying to turn Hezbollah from an Israeli military target into an Iranian bargaining chip. In Israel, they understand this very well, because the working assumption in Jerusalem is that the negotiations between Washington and Tehran may not mature. They won't mature into a final agreement. That's why Israel wants to preserve its hold in southern Lebanon, at least for the near future. In the political and the security establishment, they assess that if the agreement gets stuck, and if it becomes clear that the Iranians were only buying time, Israel will be able to tell the Americans, we warned you. But until then, Lebanon is the seed of the next explosion. If Hezbollah fires towards the communities of northern Israel, Israel will not be able to show restraint for long. If Israel strikes in Beirut or the Dahia, Iran will threaten to respond. If Iran responds, the agreement with the United States could collapse. That is the cycle that now worries Washington. And that is exactly why Trump is pressuring Israel to restrain its activities in Lebanon. He said that Israel needs to defend itself, but to do it with a good judgment. He also criticized the bombing in Beirut and asked why a building needs to be brought down every time. From Israel's point of view, this is a problematic statement because sometimes the building is not just a building. Sometimes it is a command center. Sometimes it's a warehouse. Sometimes it is a Hezbollah communications point. And sometimes intelligence knows who entered it, why he entered it, and what he's planning to do after he leaves. This is not an atheistic question. This is a security question. It's not aesthetics. At the same time, in the Persian Gulf, another test of the agreement is taking place. The Strait of Hormuz is supposed to be opened. The ships are supposed to return to movement. But in Tehran, they're already making clear that the strait will not return to its previous condition. After 60 days of free passage, Iran intends to collect fees from ships that are passing through the strait. Iranian Parliament Speaker Muhammad Bagher Ghalibaf presented this as an Iranian sovereign right. From his point of view, Tehran will provide services in the maritime passage and charge money for them. This is a very significant point. Trump spoke about opening Hormuz. Iran is talking about managing Hormuz. Trump said that the strait would return to movement. Iran says it will open, but under new rules. And when one of the most important energy routes in the world becomes an Iranian bargaining tool, every shipping company and every insurance company understands that the crisis is not really over. Another important military detail is added to this. To fully open the passage, the underwater danger must also be handled. Naval mines, obstacles, and threats to the shipping lanes do not disappear because a document was signed. That is why Germany has already sent 2 ships to the region. The mine countermeasure and the vessel flotillas that are supposed to get rid of these mines and the supply ship Musil are there. They're making their way through the Suez Canal, through the Red Sea, on their way to Hormuz. The German defense minister made clear that any mine clearing operation would require approval from Iran and Oman. That sounds like a technical detail, but it tells the whole story. Even after a war, even after an agreement, even after major American statements, the side that holds the practical key to Hormuz is still the side that can make the water dangerous. Trump said that he did not ask Europe for help and that the United States does not need assistance in the area. But in practice, when Europe sends ships, it is saying something simple. If Hormuz is not safe, the global economy is not safe. And from here, we get to the big money. United States Vice President J.D. Vance confirmed that Iran could gain access to the reconstruction and investment fund worth about $300 billion if it meets the conditions. Trump emphasized that the United States will not invest even $1 in Iran. The money, according to the American explanations, is supposed to come from a regional coalition, mainly from the Gulf states. Now, we need to stop and understand the absurdity. The very same Gulf states that lived under the Iranian threat, that observed missiles and drones, that saw oil facilities, airports, and American bases around them become targets, may now be the ones that are funding the reconstruction of the Iranian regime. You can call it a regional investment. You can call it a mechanism for stability. But in the Gulf, there will be those who see it as something else entirely, a payment to buy quiet from Tehran. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Oman, and Bahrain, they learned a painful lesson in the last war. Their money is enormous, but their vulnerability is also enormous. They host American bases. They buy weapons on massive scale. They build shining cities and financial centers. But against the Iranian missiles, drones, and the blocked maritime strait, they still depend on an outside umbrella. That's why this agreement shakes the Gulf no less than it shakes Israel. If the United States ends a war through a compromise with Iran, and if the Gulf states are asking to pay the bill, the regional message is clear. Every country will need to rethink how it protects itself. And before we continue, if you want to understand the Middle East from the ground, from Israel, from Jerusalem, through our eyes, make sure you subscribe to TBN Israel and never miss another Boots on the Ground report. Send us a comment where you're watching from, and we'll see you here every single day, twice a day. Now let's talk about the economy, because that's the story that pushed Trump towards this agreement. At the beginning of the war, the American president declared that there would be no agreement with Iran without complete surrender. But in the end, he reached a memorandum of understanding, not a surrender document. Iran took heavy blows. Its air force was hit. Its navy was hit. Its military industries were attacked. Missile arrays were damaged. But the major goals, the full dismantling of the nuclear program, the elimination of the missile program, and the fall of the regime were not achieved. Iran understood one point. It does not have to defeat the United States militarily. It needs to prove that continuing the war will cost the world too much money. Energy prices were disrupted. The shipping lanes stopped working. Maritime insurance, supply chains, nervous markets. That fear pushed Washington towards a document that freezes the situation, opens 60 days of negotiations, and tries to prevent a nuclear bomb through supervision and the dilution of enriched materials. And here too, Israel is not calm, because the enriched materials do not leave Iran. According to the understandings, it will be diluted inside Iran under the IAEA supervision. On paper, that kind of dilution lowers the concentration of uranium-235 from high levels around 60% to levels that are suitable for civilian use. But the Israeli question is not only what is written in the document. The question is, who sees all the material? Who measures it? Who makes sure that part of it was not hidden? And what happens if Iran buys time? Trump himself said that if the Iranians do not behave properly, the United States will return to bombing. That's a sentence that sounds strong. But in our region, the next question is always this: what happens between the sentence and the bombing? Because during that time, Iran can rebuild, it can move facilities, it can rebuild parts of its missile industry, and it also can strengthen its proxies. It can use the money and the oil and the new diplomatic breathing room to reach the next round better prepared. And this brings us to Trump's most unusual statement about the ballistic missiles. The American president said that there is no logic in other countries in the region having missiles, while Iran is not allowed to have even one missile. From his point of view, missiles do not destroy the world the way that nuclear weapons do. But in Israel, an Iranian ballistic missile is not a theoretical idea. It is a siren. It's an interception. It is shattered glass. It's a strike on a base. It's a threat to cities. And when you connect ballistic missiles, nuclear knowledge, enriched materials, and proxy terror groups around Israel, you get one strategic threat, not several separate problems. While Israel and the Gulf are recalculating the risks, Turkey is looking at the war and identifying an opportunity. Yes, Turkey. At the beginning of the war, Ankara was pushed to the sidelines. It tried to mediate, tried to influence, but felt that Trump was listening more to Netanyahu than to Erdogan. Now, after the memorandum of understanding, Turkey is back at the table. It is presented as one of the countries that helped advance the move alongside Qatar and Pakistan, and it is using the crisis to strengthen its position in NATO and in the Gulf. During the war, Iranian missiles were even fired towards areas connected to the American presence in Turkey. They sparked anger in Ankara, but it also strengthened the need for defensive systems. The United States, Germany, and Italy deployed anti-missile systems on Turkish soil. And at the same time, Gulf states began showing more interest in defensive systems and security cooperation with Turkey. That is how Ankara is collecting profit from both sides. It keeps its relationship with Iran, strengthens its position with NATO, sells security to the Gulf, and presents itself as a more stable address for investment in the region that suddenly looks extremely vulnerable. This is the new Middle East after this war. Not only no one fully wins, but everyone tries to sell themselves as the winners. Iran sells survival as victory. Trump sells stopping the war as an achievement. The Gulf states sell payment as stability. Turkey sells mediation as influence. And Israel looks at all of this from the northern border, from the tunnels in Gaza, and from the airspace above Iran, and asks one question: who will truly protect our security on the day that the agreement begins to crack? The Israeli answer, as always, begins with intelligence, readiness, and freedom of action. The IDF continues to build its target bank. The Air Force continues to preserve capabilities against Iran, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. In southern Lebanon, forces continue to operate against explosive devices and terrorist infrastructure. And in Gaza, even when the cameras move to Tehran and Hormuz, the war against Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, that's not over. The Middle East is now entering 60 days of tense waiting. On paper, this is a period of negotiation. On the ground, it's a period in which every side will try to improve its position. Iran will try to gain power, gain money and time. Trump will hold the agreement together. And then Hezbollah will try to bring Lebanon back to the center. And Israel will try to make sure that the temporary quiet does not become a permanent trap. Because in the Middle East, a ceasefire is not always the end of the story. Sometimes it is the only time when everyone reloads magazines, arranges documents, and waits for the first mistake. And if one explosive device in southern Lebanon already reminds us that the war has not disappeared, what will happen when Iran decides that the agreement no longer serves it? Let me know what you think in the comments. In the meantime, help us spread the truth of what's happening. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button and pray for the situation. Pray for the IDF soldiers in the north. Pray for the Israeli population, the civilians of Israel that don't know if we have security or in 60 days we'll go back to fighting. Lots of uncertainty. Pray that God's will be done here. Also pray for our team at TBN Israel here, that we are risking our lives to show you what's happening in South Lebanon, in Gaza, in other places. We want you to know the truth and know how to pray for the situation. So help us share this truth and keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.